Hey guys, it's Cece, and today I'm here to talk about my least favorite books that I read this year. I read a lot of books in 2017, and tomorrow I'm going to be talking more about what all of my favorite books of the year were, but first we should start out with the negative note, and we should talk about the books that disappointed me, made me angry, and just in general that I didn't like at all this year. I have a top 5 for you, so we are going to count up to my absolute least favorite book of the year, but I mean, it's a relatively short stack in context, but these are the 5 books that I had the most issues with, the most anger towards, and let's talk about them. First up, and coming in at number 5, we have The Lovely Bones by Alice Sebold. I think this book is mostly on here because it was disappointing to me. It's been on my TBR for the absolute longest of any book, and it just feels like a letdown to have had this book on my TBR for so long and then to be so greatly unimpressed by it. The Lovely Bones is about a girl named Susie Salmon, and she is murdered, like, in the first chapter, and the rest of the book is her looking down from heaven on her family as they try to recover from her loss and as they try to track down her killer. For the most part, this book was just dull. It went on unnecessary tangents and explored issues that weren't that meaningful to the main plot. And yes, this book is supposed to be emotional and about dealing with grief, but I found myself yawning for most of it, and it took me over a month to read altogether, which is kind of absurd in the run of things. That is not how long it takes me to read a book. Also, there was a character in this book that I believe was supposed to be a lesbian, or at least she was supposed to be a queer woman, and I did not approve of how her sexuality was dealt with. I can't believe I'd never heard of how her sexuality was handled. And it included some questionable consent issues at the end, not even with the main character, but with some side characters that I also was not a fan of in the least. So, number 5 on the list, The Lovely Bones. Boring, kind of offensive, did things that I was not very happy with, and that's why it makes this list. Next up at number 4, we have Bittersweet by Miranda Beverly-Whittemore. Spoilers for my December wrap-up, since that's when I read this book. I didn't like it. Bittersweet is about a girl named Mabel who is a scholarship student at a very highbrow East Coast college, and her roommate is super rich and kind of adopts her into their family, and over their first summer after freshman year, she invites Mabel to her family's estate, where Mabel really starts to feel like she has a place and she fits in, but she also starts to learn all of the family's secrets, and she has to decide if she's willing to put her happiness over revealing these dark secrets of this family that she's become a part of. Have you ever read a thriller? And have you ever read a thriller about a rich family with secrets? If you have read either of those, any given plot twist that happened in any of those books happened in this book. Especially the rich family secret plot twists. Every single one that I've ever read about, like, rich family has some skeletons in their closet. What are they? Every single one I've ever seen was used in this book. And if it had been 1 or 2, maybe I could have focused on the more lyrical writing, the creation of some of these kind of dubious characters, but since it was everything, by the time I got to the end, I read most of this on a plane, by the time I got to the end, I was like, just end already. I can't do this. I can't do another one of these plot twists. Just don't make me live through another one. Also, the love interest was introduced in a way that made me super uncomfortable, especially considering he became a love interest. Maybe this book had potential. It was slow going but lyrically written, but unfortunately the plot held it back because everything was awful, and I didn't like it in the least. Next up, we have another thriller. It's Always the Husband. The last 2 books are books that I gave 2 stars to. Starting with this one, the rest of these are books I gave 1 star to. I did not like this book. This book has a pretty generic thriller description. It is about 3 best friends who meet in college, and there are dual narratives. First of them meeting in college and getting close, and then of them like 20 years later, and you know something terrible happened, but you don't know what it is. So you're kind of learning about both things simultaneously, what brought them together and what kept them apart. And in the present day, there's also another, like, crime happening that a detective is solving, which is the worst part of this book. The detective who's supposed to be in this is such a bad detective. He doesn't take anything into consideration, and he is blown away by the most basic of information, but also the portions of this book that are set in college made it feel, to me, like the person writing it didn't know what college was like. I mean, I know everyone has their different experiences with colleges, and my college does not define everyone else's, but the way these girls acted, I've known a lot of college girls. These were like high school girls. It was unrealistic, it was frustrating, the characters were not layered. They changed at a moment's notice just to add to whatever tension-filled moment was happening. I was also really frustrated with how a side Latinx character was handled. It felt like her identity was just thrown in there so that there would be one person of color in the story. I never got anything from her as being the only person of color at a predominantly white upper-class college, and it just felt like kind of lazy. So yeah, overall, clearly I didn't like this one, which is why it is number 3 on my list of my least favorites of the year. Coming into number 2, can you guess it? It's Eona by Alison Goodman. Eona is the sequel to Eon, which is a book I read in 2016 and really liked, which is also what made this book such a disappointment. Eon, the first book, is about a girl named Eona who disguises herself as a boy to sort of infiltrate this group of people who practices dragon magic because girls are forbidden from using dragon magic. That first book was interesting and I liked it, but it raised a lot of red flags for how stuff was going to be handled in the second book, namely that I felt that there was a lot of potential for there to be some very ableist storylines going forward. I was right. And also the fact that this is a book with a cross-dressing main character and it had a trans side character, and I was very aware that that could go great or really poorly. And it went really poorly. As an exploration of gender, this book seemed like it was trying to be deep, but actually was not doing very much good at all. As the main character is struggling with her identity and where she stands, the trans character is forced over and over again to dress in outfits where she is forced to dress like a man, and that is incredibly traumatic. I kept bracing myself to have the story deal with what must have been a great amount of dysphoria for this character, and it just never happened. Her identity was repeatedly brushed off to focus on the main character and her romance, which was forced and annoying and did not make me care for either her or the love interest in the least. Like I said, it was also incredibly ableist, spinning off of something that happened at the end of the first book that I kept waiting for it to be called out, but it wasn't. It was a magic fixes disabilities and makes you better kind of storyline, and that was also infuriating from beginning to end. And to top that all off with how much I absolutely was not liking this book, it is so long. So I just had to sit through so many pages of this. I'm so frustrated by it, and will remain frustrated by it to the end of time, probably. And now, on to my number 1 least favorite book that I read in 2017. Some of you will not be surprised. It is Look Both Ways by Alison Cherry. This YA contemporary book is about a girl named Brooklyn who has been raised as a part of a theater family, and then she gets the chance to go to a theater summer camp. While she's there learning and falling in love with other sides of the theater world, she also finds herself having some confusing feelings towards her roommate, Zoe. Their relationship goes from roommates to more. As Brooklyn is trying to figure out who she is, she's just left in this very confusing spot in a new relationship, in a new scenario, and she kind of has to process all of that. Now, I respect and understand people who have read this book and say that it helped them from a questioning standpoint when it comes to sexuality. I understand the fact that this book is about a questioning girl, not a queer girl. However, this book angered me more than any other book I read this year, because had I read it a couple of years ago when I was questioning my sexuality, it would have done irreparable harm to me and to my point in trying to reconcile my sexuality and coming to terms with falling for my roommate. This book is not about a bisexual girl, it's about a questioning girl. And I understand the value of that book. But for me personally, this book would have done harm that I might never have gotten over when I was younger, and I can't ignore or forget the harm that it was causing even as I was reading it. The fears that having that intense relationship with another woman is just how all girls feel with one another. Fear that you were just convincing yourself something is there even though it wasn't. These were fears that plagued me, and I felt like every single one of them was being confronted and shown to me in a way that I could not handle emotionally now, let alone being able to handle it emotionally when I was questioning. Also, I had a ton of problems with Zoe, the roommate, who was bisexual, but in my opinion, played up every really negative bisexual stereotype. There are a lot of reviews on this book on Goodreads if you want to read more into any of those issues, but those are the reasons why it is on my personal least favorites of the year list, because it meant so much to me emotionally and because I cannot separate my anger and my emotional connection to this book from my experience with it. And that is Look Both Ways by Alison, which was my least favorite book of 2017. Okay guys, there you go! Now you know what my least favorite books of the year were. You might have already known, but now you know in more detail and with more anger. What were some of your least favorite books that you read in 2017? Let me know down in the comments below, and let me know your feelings on any of these books. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in another video very soon. Bye!